So you want that nice widescreen cinematic look but don't know how to do it? Well, let's look at a few ways to make that happen. Hey everyone, Camber here, showing you how to use your camera to make good videos. So if you're new, consider subscribing. Now, the proper way to shoot in this widescreen format is to shoot your videos with anamorphic lenses that capture a wider image and squeezes it into the 16:9 or 4:3 ratio, which you'll then de-squeeze in post to get that wide aspect ratio. And if you want to know more about aspect ratios, then just check out this other video I made here explaining the various aspect ratios and how they came about. But since most of us aren't using these expensive anamorphic lenses, let's look at a couple ways to fake this cinematic widescreen look with different types of cropping, as well as looking at some considerations when filming for this aspect ratio. And there's an easy way to do this and a not really hard but more involved way of doing it. So let's first look at the proper and more involved way of actually changing your aspect ratio to 21:9 when you get to editing your video. And for this, we're going to need a calculator. If we're looking at full HD footage, you'll see that the dimensions are 1920 by 1080. If you divide 1080 by 9, you'll get 120. Then multiply that by 16 to get 1920. So the aspect ratio of that 1920 by 1080 footage is 16:9. Does that make sense? Let me know if you're still with me so far by leaving a thumbs up down in the comments. So all you have to do is multiply that 120 by 21 instead to get 2520 as the horizontal dimension instead of 1920. So setting up your project like this, you'll end up with custom dimensions of 2520 by 1080. However, the problem with doing it this way is that you then have to stretch out your footage to match the width. And anytime you stretch the image, you're going to lose quality. So the way I prefer doing this where we won't lose any image quality is to divide 1920 by 21, which gives us 91.43 when rounded. Multiply that by 9 to get your vertical dimension of 823 when rounded. Now your project dimensions would be 1920 by 823. This way you can overlay your footage, set the spatial conform to none, and just frame the vertical portion how you want without having to stretch the image. And this same math problem works for 4K or any other video resolution, but to save some time, here's a list of the custom dimensions that I also have down in the description, which will give you that 21:9 aspect ratio using this technique for the various resolutions. So then when you export and watch your 21:9 film on a 16:9 screen, those black bars will automatically be filled in above and below your image. However, an issue when setting up your project like this is when you upload to YouTube, it won't recognize the aspect ratio and some of the video functionality like end screens won't be available. So the other easier way to get the cinematic aspect ratio look is to simply leave your project in the 16:9 format and overlay letterboxes to give it that widescreen look. And I have links down in the description for you for the website I use to download all these letterbox templates. Once you have them downloaded, you simply choose which overlay you want. And for this aspect ratio, I'm using the 2.35:1 for the widescreen look and drop it over top of the clips. But one very important thing to note is to make sure you use the letterbox template that matches the video resolution of your clips. Because if you overlay the 2.35:1 1080p template over 4K footage, then it won't completely cover it and you'll have a part of the image showing through on the top and bottom. Then when you upload this version of the video to YouTube, you'll have all the normal functionality because it's still in a 16:9 aspect ratio. Then when people are watching on a smartphone, they can zoom in and it'll fill the whole screen without losing much of the image. And there are a few things to consider when you're shooting in this 16:9 aspect ratio and planning on editing in 21:9. And the biggest of those is to remember that the top and bottom of your shots are going to get cut off once you get to editing. So you're going to need to shoot a little wider to leave more room above and below your subject for editing. If you have a camera that allows you to put crop marks on your screen, this will help you in framing your shots. And if you don't, you can always put a small piece of tape over your screen to get the same effect. You can also record using an external monitor, and most monitors have an option to overlay a safety area for your footage. And another thing to keep in mind is that just because you use this wider aspect ratio won't automatically make your videos look like Hollywood films. part of what gives that vibe is using those anamorphic lenses that squeeze your footage and then get de-squeezed later in post. This gives certain characteristics to shots, such as the lens flares that stretch across the screen. So this budget way of setting up your project to 21:9 will get you closer to that Hollywood look, but it's really using the right equipment that's going to make your footage look more cinematic. And so the biggest way in determining which of the ways you're going to use to get the 21:9 aspect ratio is where you plan on distributing your content. So wherever you plan on sharing, just know how changing the aspect ratio will affect the functionality of your video on that platform, and then choose what's most important for you. And if this video is helpful, please help me out by leaving a like, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you soon.